The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, the entire palace staff understood that something had fundamentally shifted in how William viewed his role as future guardian of the crown. The message was brief, clinical, stripped of the courtesies that usually cushion difficult decisions. Prince George's school event is not open to extended family attendance. This has been communicated to relevant household members. No salutation, no explanation. Just a statement of fact that would reverberate through Buckingham Palace for weeks. Camilla had received notification through her private secretary, the same way she learned about most palace decisions that didn't directly involve her ceremonial responsibilities. But this time, the notification carried weight that no other had before. She was not welcome at her great-grandson's school event, not because of scheduling conflict, not because of space limitations, but because William had decided she shouldn't be there. The decision exposed something no amount of palace protocol could hide. The boundary William had been granted through the emergency delegation wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, it was personal, and it was already being wielded in ways that would reshape how the entire family operated. Before we explore what really triggered this confrontation and how it reveals the deep fractures forming inside the royal household, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. This story gets far more complicated than a school event. The school event itself was routine. George's private institution held periodic parent gatherings, informal celebrations, moments where the institution acknowledged the humans within it. Nothing political, nothing ceremonial. Just a glimpse into the life of a young prince who, like every other child, needed his parents present and his extended family somehow managed at a distance. For years, Camilla had attended these events, not prominently, not claiming any special role, but present, occasionally photographed, occasionally mentioned in the palace's internal documentation. Another grandmother figure at her great-grandson's milestone. Nothing controversial about it, until William decided there was everything controversial about it. The decision didn't come from nowhere. It came from a conversation that had happened 3 days earlier, a conversation that started in one context and ended in another entirely. William had been briefed on George's upcoming school event, the standard review of family attendance, the quiet coordination that kept the heir's children's lives balanced between normalcy and public scrutiny. The briefing had mentioned that Camilla's office had requested attendance confirmation. Standard procedure. She wanted to know whether she should clear her schedule, should arrange transportation, should prepare for photographs that might be taken. Simple logistics. But when William heard that Camilla was planning to attend, something in his expression shifted. He didn't immediately object, he didn't storm out of the room, he simply paused, and in that pause, everyone in the briefing understood that he was calculating something, weighing something, deciding whether to let old patterns continue or enforce new boundaries. An aide had asked him directly, "Should we confirm her attendance, sir?" William had set down his briefing papers carefully. "I'll get back to you on that." By the next morning, he had made his decision, and the email had gone out. When palace staff learned what William had done, the reactions split along predictable lines. The older generation, those who had served Charles for decades, saw it as overreach, unnecessary, cruel even. Camilla was still the Queen Consort. She still held ceremonial significance. She was still family. Excluding her from a child's school event felt like punishment. But the younger staff, those who had been shaped by the new protocols William was implementing, understood something different. They understood that this wasn't about Camilla's status. It was about boundaries, about drawing a line between William's private family life and the extended royal household, about protecting his children from the complexity of adult institutional politics, and about reminding everyone, including Camilla, that the emergency delegation hadn't just changed how decisions were made. It had changed who got to make them. Camilla's first instinct was to call Charles, her husband, the king, the man who had promised her that the boundary created by the emergency delegation wouldn't extend into their personal relationship. But when she reached him, his response had been careful. Measured, not hostile, but not supportive either. "I think William is making a boundary," Charles had said, "about George's privacy." Camilla had heard the unspoken part of that sentence, the part that said, "and I'm not going to overrule him." The king, who had once bent palace protocol for love, had finally accepted that his son's authority now superseded his own comfort. That was the real shock, not William's decision, but Charles's refusal to reverse it. Anne had discovered what happened through palace gossip. the way senior royals always learned about important developments before they were officially communicated. And when she did, she had understood immediately why William had made the decision. It wasn't about George's school event at all. It was about something much deeper, something that had been building since the emergency delegation was signed. A reassertion of the very boundary that Camilla had spent years carefully undermining. Camilla's influence had been most powerful when it operated invisibly, when decisions appeared to come from Charles, but actually originated in whispered conversations with Camilla, when access to the king ran through her approval, when her preferences could reshape what happened around the entire family without anyone explicitly acknowledging that she had shaped it. But William's world didn't work that way. His private family, his children, his domestic arrangements existed in a space that Camilla could no longer access without explicit permission, and he had just made clear that permission was not forthcoming. The next morning, William had to face the consequences of his decision. Not from Camilla directly, but from everyone around him. His private secretary had raised concerns about protocol. An aide had gently suggested that the decision might create tension within the household. One older member of staff had actually asked him if he was certain he wanted to proceed. William had listened to each objection, and then he had reinforced his decision. George's school events are private family moments, not palace functions, not ceremonial occasions, just family. And in our family, we get to decide who attends our private moments. The language was careful. The boundary was absolute. When Camilla finally learned the full context of William's decision, she had done what she always did when facing rejection. She had compartmentalized. She had accepted the boundary without acknowledging that it hurt. She had adjusted her calendar, confirmed that she would not be attending, and moved forward as though nothing significant had happened. But everyone close to her understood the calculation she was making. This was not a temporary exclusion. This was a permanent restructuring of her access to the younger generation. George's school events, Princess Charlotte's private moments, Prince Louis's personal milestones. All of these had been spaces where Camilla had been present, where she had been photographed, where she had occupied a place in the documented life of the future king. Now those spaces were closed. The palace staff began noticing the shift immediately. When Camilla's office requested attendance at other family events, the tone of responses changed, not hostile, but less accommodating, more formal. Camilla would be welcome at ceremonial functions where her presence was officially required. But at private moments, at the intimate gatherings that shaped how the next generation understood family, her access was being redefined. William never made a public statement about it. He didn't need to. The boundary was communicated through 1,000 small logistics, through calendar adjustments, through revised invitation lists, through the quiet reorganization of who stood where when photographs were taken. The palace learned to function differently, and Camilla learned to accept that her access to the next generation was no longer guaranteed. Charles watched this unfold with an expression that revealed nothing, but internally, he was confronting something painful. His son was doing exactly what he had appointed him to do, protecting the crown, protecting his family, drawing boundaries that Charles himself had never been able to maintain. William's decision about the school event wasn't cruel, it was clarifying. It established that the new order Charles had created through the emergency delegation wasn't theoretical, it was operative. And William was going to enforce it with a clarity that made Charles's own fumbling attempts at boundary setting look like weakness. Anne had asked William directly about his reasoning. What she found was not anger, not vindictiveness, but something far more mature. A young man who understood that institutions survive because people occasionally have to choose the institution over personal comfort. William had explained that George needed to understand something that every future king eventually has to learn, that family and duty sometimes conflict, that the line between personal and institutional cannot always be bridged, that protecting what you love sometimes means drawing boundaries that feel exclusionary to people outside that boundary. It was a conversation that might have taken place between William and Charles, but it was happening instead between William and Anne. That shift in consultation, that reorientation toward his aunt as his primary confidant, revealed how completely William had internalized his new role. He wasn't just following the protocols of the emergency delegation, he was embodying them. He was becoming the person the crown had needed all along, someone who could draw a line and hold it, someone who could look at personal relationships and institutional responsibility and choose the latter without guilt or hesitation. Camilla's isolation, when it finally became complete, happened so gradually that no single moment could be identified as the turning point. Instead, it accumulated through dozens of small exclusions, through revised briefing lists that no longer included her, through meetings that happened without her knowledge, through the quiet restructuring of a household that had once deferred to her influence and now consulted her only when absolutely necessary. She remained the Queen Consort. The ceremonial function continued. But the informal power that had sustained her position had been systematically dismantled by William, through boundaries, with Charles's tacit approval. One night, Charles had found Camilla sitting alone in the study, looking at photographs of George from the school event that had happened without her. She wasn't crying, she was simply looking, understanding finally what she had lost and why it was necessary that she lose it. Charles had stood in the doorway and she had turned to face him. "He's protecting him," she had said quietly, speaking of William. "He's protecting George from this." Charles had nodded. He couldn't deny it. Camilla had looked back at the photographs. "From me?" Charles had moved toward her, but she had held up her hand. "No, not from me. From what I represent. From the idea that access and influence are the same as family. He's teaching George that boundaries matter more." It was the most honest conversation they had had about the emergency delegation since it had been signed. Camilla had finally understood what William had understood weeks earlier, that protecting the monarchy sometimes meant protecting it from the people closest to it. That family required boundaries, that the next generation had to learn early that duty superseded comfort, that sometimes the people you love have to be excluded from moments you would desperately like to share with them. The palace staff watched this realization settle into Camilla's acceptance, and they understood that William's decision about the school event had accomplished something far greater than preventing one woman from attending one child's event. It had established that the emergency delegation was real, that William's authority was genuine, that the old order where everyone deferred to the king's personal preferences and the king deferred to his wife's influence was truly over. A new structure had taken hold, one where the institution came first, where the next generation's needs superseded comfortable arrangements, where boundaries, however painful, were respected over relationships, however loved. By the time George's school event actually happened, with William and Catherine present but Camilla conspicuously absent, the palace had already adjusted to the new reality. Photographers noticed. Media outlets commented, but William never defended the decision publicly. He didn't need to. The empty chair where Camilla might have sat spoke louder than any statement could have. It spoke of boundaries, of protection, of a young prince learning that family means love, but also means sometimes saying no. It spoke of an institution finally prioritizing itself over comfort, and it spoke of William stepping into his role as future guardian, not with reluctance, but with the clarity that only comes when you truly understand what you're protecting and why. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.